Hey everyone, Kat here. Thank you so much for tuning in to a conversation with the Feathered Serpent. I am your host and facilitator of these conversations. I want to just take a moment to explain that, these aren't just conversations between him and I. These are conversations that we want to encourage to start happening between our audience and him. And how to do that? Well, we're going to be asking for comments and questions to be put into each video's comment section, and we will address them in the subsequent conversations. It's really about trying to get that engagement and that flow happening between potential tribe members, between people that this information that we're sharing really speaks to, as it did for me, and really pulls you towards wanting to know more, having an open mind and open heart. And if you're showing up as someone who wants to learn or to try to understand, then you show up with an empty cup. This is something I had to do as well. I thought I knew a thing or two before I met him. And that's not to say I'm not discounting anything that I have learned or experienced. It's just that when I make a decision to want to learn, I had to really train myself to come with an empty cup. I do appear to take more of a back seat in these conversations, but that's only because I am listening. I am still learning from him, and I'm more of a facilitator. So I just wanted to explain that. I also wanted to touch on that going forward, episode 11 and onwards, we are going to be focusing in on the Harmony Project specifically and everything that this project entails. So we're going to be touching on the electromagnetic fields. We're going to be touching on the Earth's grid, how to heal the planet, how to heal yourself, how to heal your communities, how to grow nutrient-dense food, which is such an aspect of health that is missing from most of our lives, our day-to-day. And we're getting sick because of that. So we're going to be touching on all of those things. Most likely, we will develop a membership so that if we want to deep dive, that'll all happen through the membership, because we feel like the people that want to join are essentially wanting to join our community, the Harmony Projects. And so there'll be more of a specific approach for that. So stay tuned. That'll be upcoming, I'm sure. Anyways, I just really hope you're enjoying these conversations as much as I enjoy hosting them. And remember to comment and to leave your questions. We're going to try and focus in on those topics I just talked about in terms of the Harmony Project for answering comments and questions. The first 10 episodes were really just an introduction and to help formulate an expectation, I guess, in terms of what he knows, how he knows it, what is going on right now that is impeding some of our growth and our understanding. The hardest thing for me was to accept that almost everything you can think of, you have been lied to. If you're in especially a Western culture, this is the case. And that for me was the hardest thing to wrap my head around. But once I did, it became very obvious. And so how do we set things right? Well, cosmically, that's already happening with this Kali Yuga and us coming out of that. So there are things that are happening, and he talks about this and addresses this. So change is happening. And unless you've been asleep on this planet, especially in the last few years, but for the last 50 or so for sure, in terms of just the obvious decline in the family structure, in our health, in our environment, there's a reason. And they know how to control the grid, and thus this is where we are now. But the Feathered Serpent's specialty is tuning the grid, if you will, and helping things flourish wherever these grid points are. So let's dive into this And let's make this our focus and let's start creating positive change, healing, and growth. And so, welcome again to these conversations. And please ask your questions. So, without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so we get to continue our conversation with the feathered serpent. The last conversation we had, we were talking about, we just started to touch on the near-death experiencers and how you were mentioning that, like not all of them that you see out there are necessarily real.
Well, no, not all of them are, but I mean, enough of them are. So if you look at, for my own personal research purposes, when I was looking at them, I, cross-reference and correlate people who've had miraculous healings and or brain death for a substantial period of time that would have resulted in mental incapacitation, and yet no damage occurred, combined with verified information transference, i.e. people being in the room when the doctors were talking when they were brain dead, and them knowing exactly what the doctor said, and that was validated by the doctors. Well, okay, at that point, you have to then move on into an assemblage of aggregating the facts, and that is obviously consciousness goes on, okay, and then look at that information, okay, and pretty much it all correlates. There is a continuation, there is an existence, and by the way, this dovetails into something else. We no longer do proper science, or at least most people, because proper science is supposed to lead to truth, but really modern science has become an establishment and maintaining dogma, and it is no longer the pursuit of truth. And evidence of this is witnessed by new discoveries, and look at the pushback that these new discoveries get, such as the information that came out about the pyramids recently.
About the which, sorry?
Pyramids.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, these are life-changing, this is life-changing information, yet people will resist it. People will not accept it, and that's not what science is. Science is simply a system of evaluation protocols whereby we, through debate and pulling apart the hypothesis, arrive at the truth, okay? And yet people get stuck that science is supposed to be this solid, immovable list of factual dogma, and it's not that at all. I mean, the scientific method, it tells you right there what it is. It's a method of evaluating information, that's all. But when you have information, so for example, say you're a scientist, a physicist, and you do not believe in anti-gravity, even though that's erroneous. Gravitic propulsion is the correct term, and you don't believe in UFOs or whatnot, and then you see one. Well, do you then say, you discount it and say, well, it wasn't because it is outside of the science facts that I learned, it's not acceptable, didn't exist, and I'm hallucinating? Or do you then say the obvious, which is the scientific hypothesis that I was operating under is incorrect, and I need to update this because obviously this occurred? So objective reality, when something occurs, people get stuck and they can't update their files. So this is what happens with things like near-death experiencers and information coming out of Egypt regarding the colossal structure underneath the pyramids. These things should transform the world, yet they don't. There's been many sources that explain why, and that is because of the level of mind control that's being used on this planet. So, we have become indoctrinated into a specific set of brainwashing protocols that basically limit our, ability to absorb and update our reality protocols, and that holds us back as a society. And it will continue to hold us back as a civilization society until the parasitic organisms that cause all this are destroyed and or removed, and we grow out of this requirement as a gestalt spiritual entity.
Right.
Because humanity obviously needs to go through these experiences or they wouldn't be happening. And why would these things happen? For example, well, why does a teenager have bad experiences? Because you're learning. Why do you fall down? Because you've got to learn how to run. Why does anything of a negative nature happen? It's to lead to a positive outcome eventually.
Right. In our last conversation, you were just touching on that, where, with the near-death experiencers, for example, they shared how they knew without a shadow of a doubt that they created their current life experience. And right, that we're immortal entities.
These are dangerous truths. And why do I say dangerous? Because if you give them to people whose minds are not prepared, and hopefully everybody's who's viewing this it can cause some erroneous interpretations. Can you just imagine telling somebody that everything is perfect, everything is planned before you get here on the other side of reality, because reality has a dual nature. That's hence the infinity symbol. It's a loop, right? And most of the religions in the world just want you to know about one side.
Right.
Because they want to control the transition, of course, and control the awareness of that other side. But I've had experiences where I was explaining the nature of reality to some people that weren't ready for it, and they went and destroyed people's property because they said, "Well, it's okay. It was all decided beforehand." Well, no, that's not what the information means. So saying that we all chose what's happening to us, and everything's perfect, and if you can do a thing, it means that the creation is behind a thing. Well, these things are higher level truths, but they can be misunderstood by lower level consciousnesses. Okay, and that doesn't mean that you get to go around and fling your poop everywhere. Okay, that's not what it means. Even though someone would say, well, yes, you just said if I can do it, it means the creation is behind it. So look, I'm flinging my poop everywhere. Look at me. Look at my monkey self flinging my poop everywhere. Ooh, that means that the Lord wants it that way. That means somehow somebody was supposed to get covered in my poop, and it's going to do some good. Well, listen, don't try to twist the situation. Don't try to game the system. If you're having a problem and you think that's what it means, then you're not at the maturity level to understand this truth, which is the whole reason why, by the way, there's been occult societies. Occult societies exist to deal with a problem, largely that was created, but a problem nonetheless on this earth of having a bunch of people in the same classroom that are at different grades. So it's like the old one-room schoolhouses where you had kindergarten kids and grade 12 kids, and they're all in the room. How does the teacher speak to all of them without causing confusion? Without, the grade 12 kids might understand something, and, but will the, kindergarten kids? Well, no, not really. So you have to be, incredibly cautious, and that's why a lot of occulted groups showed up, and the word occult, of course, means hidden. And a lot of this stuff here is just simply the tip of the iceberg. People should go research this on their own. And as Cliff High mentions, this is the age of hyper novelty, where people are going to be able to access information directly, and it's the destruction of the age of authority, where somebody's going to believe in somebody just simply because their badge or their title. And believe me, I understand the irony of sitting here saying I have memories of the Feathered Serpent, so listen, blah, blah, blah. But, these things aren't supposed to be pronouncements. They're supposed to be triggers, and they're supposed to be breadcrumbs that lead people into greater discovery. So that's what this is. I mean, by all means, disbelieve what I'm telling you. By all means, check it out for yourself. If somebody is telling you the truth, they never mind that, and they never mind time. Only a con man will put the pressure of time onto a situation and say, no, you have to believe regardless. I don't care. In fact, somebody speaking the truth will say, I don't care if you disbelieve me. You can not believe me all you want, but that doesn't mean if you stop flying the plane properly, it's not going to crash. Of course it's going to crash. There's a thing called gravity, okay? And you cannot believe it all you want, but it's still going to be there. Go ahead, jump off that building, see if you fly, okay? You won't, you'll crash, okay? And that's how I wasn't bullshitting you. So, that's what people need to do in this age, is to rely on their own experiential reality. And by the way, that's how you know what truth is. Truth is something that doesn't require your belief to operate. Right? I mean,
yeah, you talk about reality, right? And the sacred geometry of that. And
well, there's reality, the overriding reality of creation, the reality, and then there's your subjective reality.
right.
And people's subjective reality can be very powerful. I mean, you can subjectively not see your keys on the counter when they're there. Okay, and for you, they're not there. Okay, but for somebody else, they are there. Now, in the objective overriding reality, of course, they're there. It's like if you don't see a truck coming at you. Well, for you, it didn't exist, but that doesn't mean it's going to phase right through you when it smashes into your car and turns you into paste. Okay.
Right. And I love the example of the indigenous, right? Way back when they didn't.
Yeah. Well, they had the ghost dance. They didn't believe in bullets, but that didn't stop the bullets from killing them.
Right.
And that's the danger. I mean, there is no such thing as the occult or magic. These things are human affectations to cover up our lack of understanding of science. Everything that happens, obviously, is a part of reality. And, the scientific method can give us an understanding to how these things work, but they're not, when somebody says magic or somebody says, it's a cult system, what they really mean is we don't understand how it works, but it works.
Right.
We don't have an accurate model of it, but it works. Okay.
Yeah. And just to explain I was trying to come up with the actual thing that on what the bleep, right? They show where the indigenous were on the beaches and with Columbus's ships or whatever.
Well, that's the Aztec story.
Right.
It's we don't know if it's how factual it is, but
right.
I mean, it serves to demonstrate a point, because this point's been made in neuroscience many times. If something isn't in your belief system, you can't see it.
Right.
Okay. Deepak Chopra mentions this on Mayim Balek's podcast, and he says if you can't see a thing, you can't know a thing. So then how do you know a thing if you have to see it first, right? So there's this paradoxical dichotomy. Well, not really. That's what the imagination is for. But it is valid that, a while ago, many years ago, I was reading a philosophy book, and it said that if something is truly alien, you wouldn't see it. That everything you can see isn't really alien to your mind, or you simply wouldn't see it. Because your mind won't allow you to recognize it. And I mean, that's really, present because we are in an ontological universe, meaning a universe of consciousness, and therefore everything is conscious. But why don't we see rocks as conscious? Why don't we see, we're surrounded by quote unquote alien life. We're surrounded by life that is quote unquote different, and it's all consciousness. Why don't we recognize it? Because we're not at the correct maturity level, and because we've been interfered with. So a lot of our problems on Earth are problems that are intentionally caused. Okay, so why would this happen? Well, we'll get into that later, because it involves a truth that's pretty profound and powerful, and it shouldn't be disseminated lightly. But it's about our origins, and it's about who we are, and it's about what's happening to us. And if you think about it, throughout our history, we have had hidden manipulators, and they have been sort of shaping humanity down a certain road. The discussion of why and wherefore. The problem is that people get religious about a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of attachment to identity politics attached to religious conversations, and so it's a very, very dangerous minefield to tiptoe through religion, because you say the wrong word. I once had somebody who was religious apologized to me because they said that just based on one of my company's logos, they thought that I was satanic. Yet if you look at the logo, it has nothing to do with Satanism. It has, it uses a dragon loosely, which isn't even a dragon, it's a feathered serpent. But I mean, the person's like, dragons are evil, so therefore you're evil. And it was like, no, it was a cool logo. So, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? And the person called me up and apologized after many years and said, well, I for a long time I thought that you were evil, but obviously you're not. Okay, right. Well, your religious framework caused you to interpret things certain ways. And that's the thing about religion. It serves a purpose, but it's not necessarily a beneficial purpose. It's a purpose because it helps to define reality, but you have to ask yourself, who really benefits from that religion? The answer is always the high priest or priestesses, the controllers, the management, the interface is always the ones that benefit the most from that system of dogma. So when you're having discussions that appear to threaten this reality, it can get interesting, because you have to sort of tiptoe through the situation without triggering people and having them lash out and go, well, you insulted my God, so I can't listen to anything you say, or you're evil and I can't listen to anything you say. Well, that's very dismissive, but consider this, everyone who's religious. Do you really think your deity, your omnipresent, omnipotent deity, makes mistakes? You might want to consider what the words omnipresent and omnipotent mean, right? It means all-knowing and all-powerful. So how does something that's all-knowing and all-powerful make mistakes? And therefore, how can something be outside of this thing? Okay, so that's just basic logic right there, logic that you yourself set up by establishing this being as an all-powerful, all-knowing entity. So if I'm an all-knowing entity and I hold up my hand, how can I, if I can't see what's on the other side of this hand, then I'm not all-knowing. So if there is something that is outside of the all-knowing, then it's not all-knowing, is it? And therefore it's not a deity, is it? Or the deity, right? So if something is the big G, the big all-knowing, all-powerful thing, then everything works for that thing, including what you call evil or satanic or Luciferian. And this is the big rub, and all the occultists, they don't want anybody to know. Psst, they're really working for Lucifer. Okay, but why? Because in their twisted, inverted reality, Lucifer is the light bringer, and therefore he's the one that brings humanity out of darkness into light, working for the divine. Okay, so a lot of these things, see, that's just one little itty bitty thing that I can just hear people's brains snapping and breaking and running all over in pandemonium and panic attacks and all this kind of stuff. And that's why this stuff is occluded, because it would cause more harm than good if it was released into an unprepared audience. Right. And the only conjecture is the reason why this truth causes damage instead of enlightenment is because we have been prepared for that to occur. Okay, and so the reason why I'm saying these kinds of things glibly now is a form of inoculation. We all need to be inoculated against the mind virus that is modern religions. Okay.
Right.
um, and just slave thinking in general. We have been trained and conditioned to think like slaves
Yeah.
because we are slaves. So,
Yeah.
when somebody points this out and somebody discusses it, it's like, oh my God. Um, Yet, worrying serves no purpose, and ultimately, very shortly, in the scheme of things, all this stuff is going to get, all the BS is going to get boiled away. And the reason why we have periods of chaos in reality is because chaos boils away bullshit. Okay. Um, so if you think about chaotic periods, being unstable, non viable hypotheses of reality simply don't survive.
Mhm.
And I'll say this again in a way which is basically tossing a match into a gasoline fire. Okay, all these transhumanists who think that they're contributing to humanity's emerging future, you're all insane. Okay, why are you insane? Because what happens when you don't get your magic cocktail of hormones? What happens if there was, a solar flare and modern society as we know it ceases to exist? Well, then you go back to the fundamental reality that all things live under, and your illusionary hallucination is revealed as such because you can't artificially create a, you know, outward appearance that supports your delusion. Okay. Now, I mean, I didn't use certain trigger words, but people should understand what I'm talking about. Okay. Um, and that's an example, like, when you go and tell everybody you're this sex, or you're a cat, or you're a dog, and you expect to be treated that way because the slave masters and the high priests are trying to detach us from this awareness of what it is to be human. Um, uh, that's okay when you're in a society and culture that has solved the problem of existence to the point where it can maintain your delusion.
Mhm.
Okay. But what happens when that is no longer the case? When trucks aren't going, when pharmaceutical labs aren't working, when you don't get your potion, your magic potion of hormones and other forms of enabling pharmacology, well, then you're defaulted to the reality. Go tell the jungle that you're a dog. It's not going to treat you that way. It's going to treat you like you're a retarded human. Okay, and it's going to eat you. Okay, and so that's why those periods exist. Why all of a sudden society will get disrupted, because ultimately all bullshit gets removed. Okay, it gets boiled away in the difficulty. So anybody who understands this process welcomes this process because it's a curative process. It's a purging process. It's like when you ate bad food and you've got food poisoning and you vomit or have diarrhea. That is not a problem. That's actually your body engaging in correcting behavior.
It's
Okay.
nature's way.
Well, it's the way of purging out the poison.
Yeah.
And now, is that a pleasant process?
Mm.
Well, that's a perspective issue, but most people would say no. Okay, it's not pleasant to have that experience, yet it leads to feeling better. Okay,
Right.
so most of the people who have this dysphoria, mental dysphoria, and I knew and experienced dysphoria myself. Um, the solution is a mental realignment, not a objective outward uh, mutilation. Um, So, you know, all of these things are just basically reflections of our own mental illness. And it's a mental illness that has been intentionally inflicted upon us. So, you know, again, going back to the topical conversation piece in the last few weeks, and that is what's been discovered under the pyramid.
Mm.
People still haven't let that sink in. it destroys all your history. Because certainly copper wielding Egyptians, and by the way, people, it wasn't called Egypt, it was called Chem. Okay, that's just how out of touch we are of history. Um, you know, but anyway, for the sake of conversation, do you really think Egyptians from about 3500 BC created something so monumental and complex that it just it you know hasn't even sunk into people? I mean, most people found the construction on top of the sand impressive. Well, literally, that was just the tip. Okay, literally, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, there's 2/3 more construction under the sand. So if the top impressed you, and we were scratching our heads going, how did they, move this with logs and, oiled down sand and a bunch of human labor? Yeah, I guess it's possible. People were, well, water channels, this, that. Okay, so we really wrapped our heads around it. We kind of sort of explained it, but then, just barely. And then you find out that there's something 2/3 more underneath the sand that goes down 2 miles. I mean, that's just not possible uh, with a Stone Age / copper tool culture. Okay, so then who did it? Well,
Right.
not anybody we've been allowed to know. So then what happens to our whole history? That whole thing gets thrown up in the air, yet we're still here going, nope, there's nothing to see, don't look at it, because there's so much identity politics at stake. What happens to the Egyptian tourist industry? What happens to the Egyptian claims that they built it, when of course they obviously didn't? They came along and used it later for stuffing some old guy's remains in because it was impressive and convenient, and you know and they created all sorts of stories about it, but they didn't build it.